I wonder what I could make with all these sword crafting materials, thought Renato.
This chest was filled with reprints of the entire Sandman series. Reprints? What was the point of collecting those?
Ooh, and there was something else.
Renato distrusted doors that opened automatically, especially after being buried for millennia. Was this some sort of trap? They were still searching for a way in. Good. Then he hadn't come too late.
Renato hoped his mother wasn't watching. Can't we just agree to disagree? Said Renato. No? Coming back to him. He wondered what he'd remember next. You always wanted to do that.
Once you try it, you're hooked. The right jewel could really give you an edge. The wrong, well, it still looked pretty, didn't it? How could a temple to Iblis still even exist? The Transcendent Emperor had destroyed all the shrines of the lost gods after exiling them. Had it been buried in that long-ago battle? Or had Iblis foreseen his fate and hidden it from his enemy? Dead, and I'd have thought. The Ravens at least could not get past this point. Obviously, the temple builders knew how to deal with tomb raiders. This thing really needed a roof. It was a stone of the purest blackness. It reflected no light, like a void made solid. Nervous, he picked it up. Who said that? It was the stone. Eager, thirsty. That seemed tempting and terribly wrong. Zenobia was the Emperor's greatest general and a potent witch. But they had been close once, and Renato wasn't sure he really wanted to be Emperor. Why not capture the core of Sky Ripper instead? It was the eye of a lost god, torn out by the transcendent Emperor to power his greatest weapon. "Look at the core," said the stone anxiously. The stone bothered him. He hated being told what to do. Wasn't that why he'd joined the rebellion? Wasn't that why he'd refused to be a soldier? He'd agreed to come on board only if he could freelance. The stone felt a bit clingy. The sage Calaveras had told him where to find the Sky Ripper, a weapon capable of challenging the gods. Even without its armature, the core would still possess great power. He would go there. The moment he landed the Farfarer, Renato had a rare feeling of regret. It's not too late, he thought. He could turn around and sail for Zenobia's island. He frowned. Wait a minute. He didn't want to kill Zenobia, did he? Sure, technically she was the enemy, but they'd been at Sword Fu school together. They'd never been lovers, but somehow they'd been closer. She'd told him every secret about herself, except the biggest one, that she was the Emperor's daughter. No, kill Zenobia, whispered the stone, before it's too late. Renato had a lot of crafting materials. Now all he needed was a crafting bench. There was something sour in the air, like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time. Where did that go to? The stone hadn't lied about what it could do for him. With each raven he cut down, he felt a jolt of power flowing into his arm. "You're weak," whispered the stone. "The core will kill you." "Are you afraid of it?" "No, don't be ridiculous," it chuckled. But it's
Just move so much as carry it, and if you try to use it, it will explode catastrophically.
Reynardo did not trust rocks that talked in his head. He went onwards.
Reynardo told the corpses. It was something he'd seen in a play once. As he approached the core, the stone became hysterical.
No! It's too much power. We will rip a hole in space and time.
He had a sudden vision of plunging his gauntlet into the core and dying in anguish. That wasn't his vision, was it? The stone had sent him its darkest fears, hadn't it? He had a sudden impulse to do exactly that. He raised his right fist and plunged it into the core. There was a rush of light. He thought he could hear the stone screaming. And then he passed out. When Reynardo came to, the core was gone. But the Iblis stone was no longer black, but glowing with a blue light. And it was silent. "I can't hear you," he sang out, and "You?" It didn't answer. "Ha!" he said. He had defeated the demonic gem with the power of his mind. He felt invincible. It was time to attack the Imperial outpost on the Nexus. Take the battle to the enemy. But among the huge crystals, there was also an observatory. A wise man would probably ask the scientists exactly what he had first. How wise was he? As the Farfarer sailed towards the Nexus, Reynardo wondered if the core had been created to silence the stone, or even to feed its hunger. Well, honestly, he didn't care. He felt terrific. And he appreciated the quiet inside his head. The Nexus was infested with ravens, but that didn't bother Reynardo. With each death, the converted Iblis stone in his gauntlets glowed brighter, and he felt stronger. Wow. He was getting a bit bloodthirsty, wasn't he? Well, he wasn't worried. He was a warrior. They're supposed to be bloodthirsty. It was definitely easier to fight inanimate objects. Reynardo wondered if his future self had commissioned these poles. The core, absorbed in the stone, was doing its job perfectly. Bernardo could feel a little eldritch jolt every time he downed a raven, but then it flowed into the glowing stone the way water flows down a riverbed. It all felt perfectly natural, as if all his life, this was what he had been meant to do. Crafting bench. Renato wondered what he could make with it. Yes, please. Renato tore to the last remaining guards at the outpost like hot coffee through snow. There was a far speaker toad here. He called the council speaker. He knew she would be thrilled. And she was. She wanted him to come back to base. They had plans to discuss and a medal to give him. A large, golden medal. Great, said Renato. Let's talk about who else I can kill. Then the far speaker croaked again.
Hello, Renato, it said. If you get sick of slaughtering second-rate birds in the Nexus, I'm waiting for you in the mountains.
Zenobia, the witch, taunting him. With the stone, he'd finally be her match. Taunting him. No doubt she hoped to lure him into a trap, but it didn't matter, did it? He could fight his way out of any trap. He was invincible. This was gonna be fun. So where was this ambush? Renato couldn't wait. At Sword Fu school, she'd always studied a little harder, practiced a little longer, complained really a lot less. And then she'd become a sorceress. He'd always known he'd have to take her by surprise or not at all. But this would be a surprise indeed. Don't look down, he thought. Well, they really needed to redecorate anyway.
These platforms were great. Renato wanted one for his house.
The mountain paths were infested with ravens. That was swell. Every time he cut one down, the stone glowed a little brighter.
In fact, everything glowed a little brighter. Look how white the snow was, and how very blue the raven blood was.
Seriously, where was she? He wanted to try his new strength against hers.
Renato's paws were getting numb. Calaveras really didn't want company, did he? Renato felt antsy. He found a source of great power. But instead of joining with the rebels, he was on a fool's errand the Emperor's daughter had sent him on. The rebels were preparing a last-ditch attack against the Imperial fleet, counting on Renato to show up in time. Would he be too late?
At the end of the path was Zenobia. I thought you were going to ambush me, he said, a little put out. I owe you better than that. Well, what are we waiting for? That, she said, as a dropship poured a bucket of green liquid on his head. Drowsy gas. You can't stop me with drowsy gas, Zenobia. My power's too strong. Zenobia? Where was she?
When he awoke, he was staring up at the sky. Zenobia looked down at him, brooding.
I probably ought to kill you, but that'd be a bit tawdry, wouldn't it? She was tossing the glowing stone from paw to paw. This is pretty.
Zenobia!
He shouted, and then he fell back into sleep.
Renato woke up on the Farfarer. His head ached. He drank his favorite hangover remedy, but the brandy did no good.
Zenobia had beaten him again. Oh, he really should have listened to the Iblastone in the first place instead of messing around with the core. He had a bad feeling about the upcoming fight, but what kind of hero misses the final battle?
Renato was bruised and tired. He wasn't looking forward to killing ravens. Didn't even seem scary. It felt like a chore, like sweeping the practice room at Swordfu School, which he'd done his best to leave for Zenobia whenever he could. What would she do with the glowing Iblis stone? That should terrify him, shouldn't it? But he just felt dull and stupid as he carved his way towards probable doom. He was sort of yanking his own shape, wasn't he? Renato knew more than he ever had. But about what? Had been the terror of the sandcastles when he was 2. Renato had always wanted a flying carpet. This was more like a flying tabletop. It would do. It was all so unfair. He'd wanted to protect himself, protect the world from the Iblisstone's hunger for blood and souls. And all he'd done is get mugged. Next time he owned a supernatural artifact that wanted tribute, he'd serve it champagne and caviar.
Zenobia was cleaning blood off her sword and weeping. "It's so hungry. I can't stop killing," she said. "But I fed it the core of the Sky Ripper, and now it's hungry again." She wept. It was true. The Iblis stone was black again, a void that seemed to suck all the light out of the sky. "Take it from me, Renato, while you still can." "Okay. I'll take it," he said. Yes, he thought. This is what it means to be a hero. To save the soul of even his old enemy when it looked like all was lost. He stepped forward to accept the sword from her outstretched hand. She flipped the sword, and the blade went into his gut. As the Iblis stone sucked his soul into its infinite darkness, he could vaguely hear a voice, something like Zenobia's chuckle. "Sucker." Renato stared at the book. He was still alive. Again. And still only flying away from burning Ubar. Had he lived that adventure? Or only dreamt it? Had he really died? It felt so real, not like a dream at all. And he'd lost again. Oh, he hated that. But he had made different choices. And he'd lost in a different way. It was the book, wasn't it? Oracles showed you your destiny. But this was showing him different ways he could die miserably. Thanks a bunch, book, he thought. But these were destinies that he did not have to fulfill. But he'd learned another true thing. The Iblis stone was evil. It would try to corrupt anyone who used it. But that meant there must be a destiny where he survived and won, right? Otherwise, what was the point? And with that, the book's pages fluttered back once more to the beginning, and the clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game-changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. On the other hand, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Lapino was no game-changer, but could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens? Ah, Lapino. Apparently, the Mad Rabbit had sold a Pegasus that he did not exactly own. Lapino always wiggled out of trouble, given time. But he was out of time. The Ravens had figured out that Lapino was a rebel spy. If the fleet reached him first, they'd string him up for that. Never mind the winged horse. Lapino had apparently managed to confuse the judge by arguing that he hadn't actually stolen a winged horse. He'd only sold it. But wait, where was the prison? The village was empty. Had everybody fled the Ravens? Take a leap of faith, said the inscription.
ravens had taken the town. Renato had seen villages emptied like this. All the people taken away to be sacrificed in the Emperor's secret rituals. Renato hoped the people were just hiding. It wasn't his fault. He looked so breakable. What was really fun was hooking yourself onto a moving ship. Renato thought of the Iblis stone and shivered. He had no business messing with ancient, cruel artifacts. What he needed was his friends around him. Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose. Every day he was getting better and better. Ravens were landing everywhere. The advance guard. He'd better get moving. If they got to Lupino first, they'd eat him for breakfast. Or a snack. Ravens weren't picky. If they got hungry, they sometimes forgot to interrogate their prisoners. Even top spies like Lupino. Where had the mad rabbit got to? here. Sharp? Check. Pointy? Check. Flexible? Check. What else do you need in a sword? Bernardo felt a chill run down his back. Or possibly a flea. That he didn't feel more pain. Just a bit dizzy. Dirty and bloody, Bernardo finally reached Lapino. The rabbit was practicing his shuffle. Bernardo recognized the cards. It was Lapino's favorite deck. Oh, I thought you were in danger. I am. The ravens are coming. Oh, the prison thing. Right, yeah, we see this guard owed me 53 ducats, so we made a deal. They're very reasonable people, actually, for weasels. Now, I got a brilliant plan to kidnap Zenobia. We capture Zenobia, we find out what she knows, and that's the whole war right there. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Capture the Emperor's greatest general, who also happened to be a deadly sorcerer and, oh, his only daughter? That would be worth it. On the other hand, he could still get to the core of the Sky Ripper, even if he couldn't get the whole thing. It must have great power. To make the Sky Ripper, the transcendent Emperor had wrapped an armature around the eye of a god. Bernardo had already let that armature slip away to save Lapino's life. But even its core, the eye torn from a god, surely they could fashion a great weapon from that. The core of the Sky Ripper? Lapino's excited. That's an actual thing that we could just go and get. You've been busy. He sure had. Bernardo told him all the things he'd been up to. Soon they got to talking about old times, about wages they'd won and lost, and scrapes they'd barely got out of. It was good to be back with his friend. True, the core was capable of terrible, uncontrollable destruction. But this time, he was sure it would work great. It's beautiful here. thought Reynardo. He was thrilled to be back with his old war buddy. He'd missed the mad rabbit, but something was not quite right. The waterfall was spectacular. You had to enjoy these things as they came. We passed this way but once. There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time. When Reynardo went to the china shop, for some reason the owner was always nervous. You almost never saw wild gogglers together like this. The toads had to train them not to peck each other to death. So these had to be imperial gogglers. That meant ravens were up ahead. Reynardo hated gogglers, but it freaked him out to cut them. Renato felt wrong all over. He could feel an almost palpable sickness in the air. And if the land could have tumors, they would look like these monstrous crystals. The forest was quieter than it had been. There were insects, but few birds, if you didn't count the ravens. Renato smelled sick animals and dying ones, but no healthy ones. And getting a bad feeling about this, Renato thought. Maybe Lapino was right. Maybe he should have kidnapped Zenobia instead of coming. Of course there was a puzzle. You couldn't expect the transcendent... Couldn't be good for global warming. As he held the radiant icosahedron, Renato felt queasy, like dozens of tiny worms were nibbling his insides. It wasn't healthy to be so close to the eye of a god. How could he use it? He could take it to the observatory. The scientists there could tell him how to harness its ancient power. But honestly, Renato ached to get away from it. He brought the core back with him to the Farfarer. But honestly, Renato ached to be rid of it.
Tell you what, said Lapino. I'll take it to the observatory. You attack the Imperial outpost. The Imperial outpost was a vital communications node. Taking it could shatter the Empire's ability to coordinate. And it would be full of secret plans and maps and maybe even rebel prisoners. It was a good target for a hero like Renato.
But what if Lapino lost the core to the Empire? That could be a good thing, couldn't it? Was Renato ready to take that risk? Maybe it was better if he brought the core to scientists himself. Lapino was a touchy rabbit. Renato knew that.
You're brave, I know, Renato said. But this is what I was hired to do.
At least let me run ahead and warn the scientists you're coming.
So, Lapino was intent on being a hero, just like him. War made sensible men crazy for glory, and Lapino had never been sensible. But what was the harm? Lapino might well trip over a hornet's nest of ravens. But that was better than ravens lying in ambush, wasn't it?
They finished the trip to the Nexus in silence. Renato had no sooner rescued his friend than he was putting him back in danger. All right, he finally said as they landed. Go. As Renato watched Lapino vanish on the horizon, he could feel nausea building in him. He felt ill, Could his knees really be aching this much? But how could he have handed the core off to Lupino? That was a recipe for disaster. If they didn't want their things broken, they really ought to make them stronger.
Renato felt worse. All his joints were aching now. He'd been through beatings that felt better than this. So the core had a kind of poison that could harm you without even touching you. That's new. Well, it had power. The rebellion needed something with power. And how was this any worse than a sword wound? Well, a death by sword was sudden and fair. This was just squalid. A piecemeal death, like old age.
The Imperial fleet was closing in on the rebels. And what had Renato accomplished? He'd rescued Lupino, but ignored his plan. Now he was dying of the core's poison. Don't look down, he told himself. Don't look down.